Well, thank you very much for coming this afternoon, evening, I would say. Thank you, Debbie, for the introduction. Thank you, Josh, for the invitation to come and talk about Neanderthals. That is one of my passions, so I'm very happy to be here talking about Neanderthals. As Debbie beautifully introduced, I'm a lecturer here at the ANU, at the School of Culture, History and Language. And as she was saying, kind of telling a bit of the story, I kind of coming back to my original PhD. So I did my PhD in Spain, in the Autonomous University of Barcelona, and I worked, as David was saying, in some assemblages from Neanderthal sites and early modern humans to look at the comparison. Then I came here to ANU to do another PhD under Professor Sue O'Connor's supervision, and I worked in in her big project on looking at the migration from Sunda to Sahul, so I was looking at the assemblages from that. But now, I've been lucky enough, this year, can't remember which year we are, but one of these years, I think this year, I started a DECRA project. And I was very lucky because on my DECRA, I'm kind of coming back to look at Neanderthals. So I will talk a bit about two of the sites I'm looking at in my DECRA. But I also thought it would be good, because I don't know, you're all highly intelligent people, and you know a lot about archaeology, but I don't know how much do you know about Neanderthals. And I don't know how much do you know about the new things we are knowing about Neanderthals. So I thought it would be good to give a bit of a review of what we know and where are we sitting now in the study of Neanderthal behavior, anatomy, all these kind of things. And to start with that, I just wanted to show you quickly these two images that really show what has been the research of Neanderthals in the last 150 years, a bit over 150 years. We kind of moved from these kind of illustrations from the early 20th century, 1909, where we have this Neanderthal that is ready to attack outside La Chapelle-aux-Champs, that is one of the sites in France. And you can see this kind of ape figure with the big cap waiting to, I don't know, smash a deer or something, to what we have now, that is this kind of absolutely beautiful reconstruction. So this is a reconstruction that was done, I think, last week or the week before, by the Case twins brothers. But they are these amazing artists from Netherlands, if I'm not wrong. And this is the reconstruction based on the skull that is being called Sanidar set, so one of the skulls in Sanidar. And that's one of the beautiful reconstructions they made. So you can see how kind of our preconceptions about Neanderthals are really changing a lot. So, as I was saying, Neanderthals were discovered, the first fossils of Neanderthals were discovered in 1856 in the Neander Valley in Germany. And it became the first extinct human that was known to science. So, of course, it occupied a really significant place in studying human evolution and in our history and evolutionary history and all the things that came after that. During the 20th century, and mostly 19th century, end of the 19th century and 20th century, there was this conception that Neanderthals were the opposite of us. So we were sophisticated and evolved and complex. Neanderthals were half beasts, right? And it's this very human kind of conception of we have to be against what we are facing, right? So we have to be comparing us with the others, and of course we are best because we survive. So there was this idea of primitive, brutish, and intelligent compared to these more developed modern humans. That kind of led to explanations about the extinction of these hominids. So obviously we came across, we killed them all because we were better. But from the 2000s, so in the 21st century, we are starting to see that these things are not that simple. And we are getting more data, we are getting good interpretation of the data, and we are seeing Neanderthals have much more than what we first thought. So we pass from this. I always recommend all the lectures I talk about Neanderthal to watch this movie. It's on YouTube, and it's absolutely gold. It's it's like it's a bit of it in YouTube. And it's this mad scientist that turns into a Neanderthal, and it's just gold, like B or D series movie, right? So we pass from that to this. right? So that's the kind of reconstruction we have now, as we were saying. We have a Neanderthal doing a Rubik cube. So we are not knowing they are resilient. They were adept. They could adapt to the environment, and they were very close to the type of behavior we or early modern humans had. Our behaviors were actually very close. And we know that because, as I was saying, there has been some new lines of evidence or some kind of revisiting old lines of evidence. So I just kind of selected some of them that are kind of making the news recently. So we have everything that is related to digital reconstructions, 3D virtual reconstructions, all these kind of things. Not because they look good, but they do. Also because of the kind of analysis we can do with these new tools. So we have things like micro-CT. So we can look at the bones inside the bones without having to damage them. We have the synchrotron radiation, so we can look at growth trajectory. We can look at all these special things, all these special factors that we are not able to look at just by looking at the few fossils, because we don't have that many Neanderthal fossils, but kind of going inside the bones. We can look at dental histology, so how the formation of the teeth, same as the bones. Or we can look at chemical and physical methods that will tell us about diet and mobility. So think about isotopes, for example, some of the methods. Of course, biomolecular analysis has been a big one for the last few years, and anything to do with ancient DNA, now kind of proteins have jumped in the game, and now paleoproteins is the new thing. But this is telling us a lot about evolution, about how we evolved with Neanderthals, and also how was that interaction. Because as I'm sure you know, modern humans and Neanderthals coexisted during quite a long period of time. So what happened when they were coexisting? And proteins is just kind of increasing the potential of ancient DNA. We have new ways of building paleoenvironmental reconstructions. So looking at climatic conditions, again with isotopes, with things like alkanes, all these different tiny microscopic or nano-microscopic, whatever you call that, things that are on the soil. They can give us information about the climate. We can look at how the land was used, so mobility, getting raw materials, all these kind of things. That's new things that are coming through GIS, and also macro and micro botanical remains that we were not able to study 20, 30 years ago. But as I was saying, I don't want to give the impression that it's only new things that are giving us information. Actually, looking at all assemblages with new eyes and with new ideas is also giving us a lot of information. So we cannot forget about the traditional material of archaeology, so bones, stone tools, maps, all these kind of things are also giving us information. So if I can get a few of you to say one word of what do you think about Neanderthals. When I say Neanderthal, what comes to your mind? One word.
Cool.
Cool, that's a good one.
Us.
Us?
Ancestry.
Yeah.
Tough.
Ancestry, tough,
Cousins.
cousins. Right, so these are all these, and I don't know, but I don't think any of you have studied Neanderthals much. But we all have our own thoughts about Neanderthals, right? Like what we think about them, how do we see them? So closer to us, cousins, cool. I also say them cool. I just wanted to go a bit about some of these old assumptions and what we know that. So for example, one of the classical ones, and probably the first one that was used to distinguish between Neanderthals and modern humans and to see this big difference that it was proposed, was by looking at the anatomy, right? Looking at just the physical anatomy, the bones. So Neanderthals have always been proposed to be have a body that is adapted for the cold weather, right? So it was all this idea of an enlarged rib cage, the barrel-shaped thoracic cage that probably all of you have studied. The thicker diaphyses, the shorter tibia and fibula, so kind of chunky, small guys. So, and there was this relationship, you can see the pointer here, of dry heat, so the Bergman law, dry and heat, will create smaller heads, short bodies, long legs, taller people, while the dry and the cold will generate the Neanderthal kind of anatomy. That has been going on for years, and people still study this, and people still support this. But of course, there is more research, and going back to these virtual reconstructions that have been done, I wanted to show this study they did in 2018, shared by Olivenza and colleagues. So this is from Kebara Cave, for you is the Middle East. No, it's not the Near East, it's the Middle East. It's right. From the area of Lebanon, Middle East. What they did is luckily, they have this thoracic cage from a Neanderthal, the Kebara 2 thorax, it's called. And what they did is they did this 3D reconstruction, this CT scanner, and then they put it next to the mean model human in the center, a male in this case, and then they superimpose both. And when we look at the superimposition, so blue is the Neanderthal and gray is the model humans, yes, there are differences, and here, I don't know if you can see it very well, but you can see it's a bit wider. But it's also related to the rest of bones being wider. So for example, the pelvis is wider. And what they are talking now, what they are proposing is this is not, and we are talking in the Middle Near East, so not very cold. So what they are proposing is this is not related to this cold weather, it's more related to the type of breathing, the breathing capacity of Neanderthals, and probably even the respiratory system, how it works. So it's giving us this idea of, things are changing. It's not as easy as we thought. There's been a lot of research on the teeth of Neanderthals because, no surprise, they are the best preserved, more than the bones. So there was a lot of interest to look at the growth rate of Neanderthal babies and also when they get weaned, when they stop breastfeeding. Because that would have implications about how weak Neanderthal babies were or not. And if that would cause an extinction. Because for many years it was proposed that Neanderthals has this really long infancy, so that meant that females were not that fertile, because they had to breastfeed, all this stuff. You can see the correlation here. So people have been looking at that. And what they've seen, and I have selected a couple of papers here on the top, you have the study by Roberto Macchiarelli and collaborators, where they look at, here on the left, Laches, that's one of the Neanderthal individuals, and comparing to 3 mother individuals from different geographic areas. The vertical line you have is the distance of the enamel junction line, so where the crown and the roots of the teeth can get together, join. Enamel dentin junction. Before birth and after birth. So how it grows, then there is kind of a regression when birth happens, and then it keeps growing in the mid-teeth. When we compare this, even the pre-birth and the after-birth, you can see their values are pretty similar to modern humans. So they have either faster or quite similar growth rates than modern humans. On the bottom, what we have, and I know this is very complex, I don't understand a bit of it, what they were looking at, and this is something that has been done also in primates, so looking at strontium-calcium ratios and barium-calcium ratios, you probably know a lot about that, to look at the time of weaning, when kids finish breastfeeding. And again, we have a similar result. So when we are looking, we have, this is like average for modern humans, and then you have Neanderthals in B, C, D, and in E we have upper Paleolithic modern humans, and here they are comparing the 4 of them, and as you can see, the lines can overlap. So it seems like both Neanderthals and early modern humans, they tend to wean kids when the babies when they were between 5 to 6 months old, so not that different. And again, that says that this idea of Neanderthal becoming extinct because of not enough fertility rates and all these kind of things, that doesn't really support anymore. Then of course we need to talk about genetics, because it's the new big thing. So I like to see the genetics and how genetics have changed in Neanderthal research at this idea of from avoidance to attraction. So we went from we are completely different, we have nothing to do with them, to actually there was interbreeding. Oh no, right? So as you probably know, there is approximately a 2% of Neanderthal genomes or component in non-African populations genome. And it was proposed when this was found out in the early mid-2000s, I would say, that it was because there was a single pulse or a single period of interbreeding that happened just after out of Africa, right? So modern humans came out of Africa, Neanderthals were there doing their things in the Middle East, and they just came across, interbreed, that was it. Well, it's not that clear now, because now we know that actually modern East Asian individuals, they have more Neanderthal components than what Europeans, mostly Europeans, Central Europeans do. And what researchers are proposing, and these are some of the ideas proposed by Federico, I think it's Federico, and collaborators, is that there are multiple and population-specific causes. So that means, it's big words, that the Neanderthals were coming out and there were multiple interbreeding events. And that's why the more in East Asia, what we have in the whole world kind of thing. So that's bringing a different and interesting story. And of course, if we are other archaic hominids, like Denisovans, then everything goes crazy. Because then we have interbreeding between Denisovans and Neanderthals, and then Denisovans and modern humans, and everything is just so complex that I think it tells a really nice story. It's just telling us, again, that things are not that simple. And we need to look at things in detail. And the more we learn, the more we can be sure that we are not sure about anything, right? Another interesting thing, and I put this just for you, Kate, so don't blame me, it's about kinship. So I didn't know about this paper actually, and the other day I was just looking at some papers, and I came across this one. I don't know if you've seen it, from Siberia, of course you have. Really interesting, because I didn't know they can propose these things. We probably will have a massive discussion about this later. But what they are proposing is, this is from a cave called, what was the name, Josh? Jariskaya?
Yeah.
Something like that?
Sounds right.
South of Siberia, in the Altai Mountains. And they managed to extract some ancient DNA from some bones. And what they found is some of these individuals are related, or they live at the same time. So you have what they say here, the same individuals, so the same male, the same female, these remains that will come from the same male, mostly. There is a father and daughter related in there, and then some kind of second degree relationship. Another interesting thing that I read from this paper was that it seems there is more variation in the mitochondrial DNA, so there is more variation in females. So it seems this is related to a female migration. And that tells, again, an interesting story. And I think it kind of breaks a bit of the cliches of, the big Neanderthal man going around doing things. Well, actually, women were walking around doing things too. And another thing that has been just annoying me for the last few months is this concept of how God is called. I will explain why in a bit, but we all know about these interglacial and glacial cycles, and Neanderthals were living through these marine isotope stages, and you have the idea of these are just the marine isotope stages from 1 to 9. Even numbers are interglacials, no, the other way. Even numbers are glacials, odd numbers are interglacials. And it doesn't seem to be that easy again. So, and as I said, this is related to something I will talk about in a bit. But I was listening to Sandra Pedersani last year in a conference she was giving. She has studied some of the isotopes and some of the alkanes in the sediment in some of the major Middle Paleolithic sites in France, in La Ferracie, for example. And it was really interesting because she saw these results. And what we are seeing here is oxygen isotopes, carbon isotopes, and nitrogen isotopes. And what she was looking at is the temperature in the NIS3, interglacial, NIS4, glacial, NIS5. And she was expecting to see this big change, and she couldn't find it. And then she did the same to look at the mean temperature for the warmest month, the average, and the coldest month, so warmer on yellow, average in green, coldest in blue. And it doesn't seem to change that much compared to what we have currently in the area. So we had a good conversation about that later on, and we both kind of get to this idea of we keep trying to match these big frameworks that we have mostly from Central Europe, these big narratives. But we are not looking into the small picture. We are only focusing on this big picture, and we are not looking at the local conditions. Of course, in every specific regional area, we might have different conditions. And the people living there will experience different patterns of activity. So that's something that is been starting to go on. This is another one of my favorite studies from a long time. So as David was saying, I do fauna, I'm obsessed with bones, and especially with taxonomy, absolutely obsessed. And I think I got obsessed because of this, of all the story about Neanderthals. So you probably know about all the story with beam force and scavenging. So Neanderthals were considered a game, they were not that smart, so they couldn't hunt. They had to go and steal animals, from other predators. So there was all this idea of Neanderthals where their diet was based in scavenging, because modern humans were able to hunt, but not them. And this was mainly based because when Binford and some other people studied some of the fauna collections from, again, the southeast of France and some of the old material from Africa, what they found is bits of bones, so things like the distal part of the limbs, so the hands, the head, parts of the bones that won't carry that much meat. So what they assumed was, well, these people are getting to carcasses that have been already clean of all the junky stuff, they are just keeping what is left. But of course, taxonomy came to the rescue. And people start saying, well, there is a problem with how bones were collected. So people didn't collect everything that was on the side. They only collected the big bones they could recognize. And then Lyman introduced all the idea of motility and bone density indexes, so how these will reflect, how they will explain the kind of patterns we have on a site. So once we kind of sort that question of, yes, Neanderthals were also hunting, then we move into how were they hunting, so which kind of strategies they use. So you probably have heard of the rodeo rider hypothesis? No? Yes? Yes? Some no? Tell you very briefly. So the rodeo rider hypothesis, what they did, Berger and Trinkhaus in the 90s, they did this analysis of trauma, lesions in early modern humans, Neanderthals, and rodeo riders. And they compared it, and what they said it was Neanderthals have kind of a similar pattern to what you have on rodeo riders, and that means they were close range hunting, because they will get, hurt by animals. But Henrik Gauss, he published a paper a few years ago saying, well, we were actually not that good when we did this study. And I think it's a really nice note that he wrote, a review of the paper saying, well, there is more reasons for it. There can be intra-population violence, right? And they can be fighting. There are many other reasons, and taxonomy is a big role. So that idea kind of move on, but people like Sabine Wodzinski, they work in Soningen, that is one of those dream sites, where they have the wooden spears that are 300,000 years old. And they did this study that I love, because it's just so weird. I love it. They found this up here, this pelvis, this pelvic bone from a deer. And they found this damage and this damage on it. So up here, you can see how it has that puncture type of thing, and this other kind of ragged puncture on it. They did, and I just took a few images from it, but I really recommend reading this paper. they try everything. So they say, oh, is it a carnivore? So they look at carnivore marks. They look at other bones on the assemblage, what kind of insects damage, all this kind of damage. And they want to look, oh, can we prove this is human-made? So they developed this crazy machine where they are kind of emulating what horizontal or vertical thrusting will do. So they got a pelvis from a deer, for a deer in this case. They put it inside a ballistic gelatin, so it has kind of a soft thing, and then they just stop. And this is the result they got, and some of them they look really similar. So they proposed the idea that this animal, in this case, it was actually hunted that way, like behind and from down up. And I think it's just brilliant, like they can get to this detail, and it's opening just so many ideas and questions. So moving a bit on, sorry, because I talk a lot about Neanderthals, I get really excited about it. So I just wanted to talk about a bit of the DECRA project. So for my DECRA, it's called Neanderthal Hunting Ability and the Extinction of Archaic Humans. And I'm looking at these three sites, Abric Pizarro, Roca dels Bous, and the other way, Covagran, and Roca dels Bous, from this area in the northeast of Spain. So Barcelona is like 150 kilometers from it. And it's an area that we've been working on for at least 17 years or more. I've been working for 17 years, my colleagues for more. And it is defined, it's kind of in between mountain ranges, it's the beginning of the Pyrenees, and you have also these big rivers that lead to another big river in the south. So it's an area where you have very dry summers and very hot summers, very cold winters, but you do have a lot of natural resources. So nowadays it's a farming area, but you still have like wild deer, you have wild boar, you have water, you have raw materials, all this area. And the idea of my DECRA is to look at hunting abilities from Neanderthals by looking at if they were hunting small animals or not. That is another whole discussion about if Neanderthals were able to do it or not. And we think yes. And also looking at proteins, because as you probably know, a lot of the bones, or probably 90% of the bones we find on a site, we are not able to identify the species they belong to. So with proteomics, we can be, hopefully, being able to say, is this a fallow deer, a roe deer, a red deer, what type of deer or horse or bovine it is. So just take you through those two sites. So I'm going to talk about Covagran and Abric Pizarro. So Abric Pizarro is the site that David was saying. I took a few students, or more students next year, for a field school. Great site. This is the site, so I probably don't see much, but you also don't see anything on the screen, so don't worry about it. But there, it's a small rock shelter, just very over, just kind of hidden in this small valley called Barranc de las Coves. That means caves, cliff in Catalan. Next to this tiny village that is called Villa Mayor, where you have 3 people living, so very small. It's around 700 meters above sea level. Just telling you about the chronology, so we've been trying different methods to date because we saw that the material that was coming out seemed older than what we had in other sites. So on the other sites, if you remember on the other slide, most of them go from 47,000 to more recent times, or more, whatever, closer to us. We thought Pizarro was older than that. So we went, okay, radiocarbon is not going to work, let's not waste our money, let's try something else. So we tried thermoluminescence, we tried single grain optical stimulated luminescence, and uranium-thorium. And we got the results earlier this year, and they were really exciting, because now we know that we are moving between around 60,000 to 100,000 at least. And we have a unit here that we haven't managed to get a good date from, but that has to be older than the 100,000 we have here. So in Pizarro, we have occupations that are dated to the MIS-3, the marine isotopes stage 3, interglacial, 4 glacial, and 5. And it's really interesting that we have stage 4, because there are not that many sites in the Iberian Peninsula and in Europe in general that are dated to this isotope stage 4. So these are all the sites you have dated to that area in the Iberian Peninsula, and these are all the sites dated to MIS3, MIS4, MIS5. So you can see there are, sorry, MIS3 and MIS5. So there are many more than what we have for MIS4. We've done a few of paleoenvironmental research on the site. So we have a specialist looking at the charcoal and look at time, as it seems to be everywhere in that area. And we also have a colleague looking at the pollen. So the palynological study was really interesting because it pointed out we also have oak. And that doesn't seem to come in many of these sites, but it does come in some of the sites kind of northern to the Pyrenees. So again, it's kind of talking about these local conditions and making us rethink about the idea of how cold is cold. So are we looking at a really cold time that just came after this kind of warmer MIS5? Or we have similar conditions? Because we don't really see many, like here you have 3 of the units, so M, P and Q. P and Q would be MIS4 down here, and apart from a bit more olive trees, olea, the rest of the pollen doesn't change much. So we don't really have those changes. It seems we are looking at thermophilus forest refugium, so warmer-ish temperatures. But we need to bear in mind that pollen and charcoal is giving us different resolution. So that's something that we need to consider also when we are putting this data together. And it's pretty similar to what we have nowadays. So this is from this year when we were doing fieldwork. What do you see? Oaks and pines. So haven't changed much. For the large fauna that was analyzed, we have Ebony Westbury that is doing her PhD on the fauna. This was one of the papers. So one of the amazing things about Pizarro is how well preserved the bones are. It's absolutely unbelievable compared to the other sites. We have a very low number of carnivores. So in this graph, I just put some drawings so you can see the animals. So we have a lot of red deer, quite a lot of equids, so horse, hydrantinus, goat, quite a bit of turtle in both sides, but not that many carnivores. Carnivores is just a tiny bit here, and these are all the carnivores. Wild boar a bit, and bovids, like bison or urok, just not much. So that kind of puts Pizarro apart, takes it apart from other sites in the area where there is a lot of carnivores, because you have these kind of occupations, successive occupations of carnivores, then Neanderthals, and then back. We don't seem to have that in Pizarro, and I have to say, most of those sites where you have carnivores and Neanderthals, they are cave sites. This is a rock center, so that kind of makes sense to us. What Ebony also found is they are bringing all these very fleshy parts, so the scapula, the limbs, so the bits where you have all this meat. So that means they are getting to these animals and getting the most of it. For the small vertebrates, it was really interesting. This year I managed to look at the turtle bones, and I identified them as this species, the Western Herman tortoise. And this species, for what we know currently, they have to be in warmer temperatures. So this species is only found, or these bones were only found in the more recent unit, in M, that is dated to this beginning of the MIS3, end of the MIS4. So that might make sense. But I have to still look at where are we finding these turtles to see if we can make some kind of approximation to temperature. They all have cut marks, they all have percussion marks, they've been burned. It's just absolutely brilliant. Very large number of rabbits, and that's not a surprise in Spain, we have a lot of them. And I did a bit of an approach to trying to look at what brought the rabbits. So are they natural deaths, are they brought by other animal, or were they brought by human? So by looking at the type of the skeletal profiles, the bones you have preserved, it seems to match what we have for humans from neotaphonomic experiments. We have quite regular breakage patterns, that's another kind of characteristics of other humans, Neanderthals or humans in general. consumption of animals. They kind of break them the same way all the time. And we have some cut marks. So at least part of the assemblage was brought by Neanderthals. So it's kind of ticking this box of, Neanderthals were able to hunt these animals. The last site I'm going to talk about is Covagran. So Covagran is where I did my first PhD. Same kind of area, so if you remember, Pizarro was down here. That's Covagran. So again, same kind of transversal valley. Near the Montsec, that is the first hill where you can say you're in the Pyrenees, kind of thing. Segre River in the south, and again, the contact to this river. So you see, same area. There is the other side, Roca dels Bous, that I'm not going to talk about, that is just by the river. Covagran is in this ravine or creek that is quite dry, and it's kind of out of the way. It's kind of hidden there in an enclosed valley. So that's an image of Covagran. Covagran is very famous for rock climbers. If any of you do rock climbing, that's like the Green Cave. And that's also another discussion with how do we look after heritage, how do we do these things. We'll have time for that today. It is located in a marginal location in the sense of it's kind of hidden in a very, very narrow valley. It's really, I was absolutely mind blown the first time I went to this site because you just go through this track and it's just twist, track, and suddenly there is this thing there. And whoa, you don't see it coming. So for us, what we think, and we learned about the site because the local people told us there was a site there. We didn't see it. For us, it tells us Neanderthals and other humans and the people that were coming to this rock shelter obviously knew it was there. So there has to be this knowledge transfer somehow of people knowing what are they looking for. So this is another view of the site from kind of the hill in front of it. What is really interesting from Covagran is we have occupations from around 50,000 all the way to Bronze Age, to 3,000, in different parts of the caves, of the rock shelter, sorry. I keep calling it cave because the name in Catalan is cave, but it's not a cave, it's a rock shelter. So we have excavated 3 different areas. So this is a 25 square meter surface, massive surface. We have what we call the ramp area because it's higher topographically, as you can see. Here, this represents a big block that just fell off. I don't know if you can see it on the photo, but it's down there. And that's what has allowed for the sediment here to be preserved. The rest of the cave, as you can see, this is clearly created by a river coming in, so it has eroded everything inside except for this part here that is higher. And luckily, we excavated there and there is Middle Paleolithic and Upper Paleolithic, so very, very lucky that that got preserved. So what we have in this area is, as I said, Middle Paleolithic, so all these S1 units are Middle Paleolithic, Upper Paleolithic, 497A and C, and 497D we are still working it out. So we are calling it the transition, but depends where you look. It is modern humans or Neanderthals. We are there. The transition area that is called, that is the transition between the higher part and the bottom part of the rock shelter, that is dated to the Magdalenian, so 14,000 years old, give or take. And the platform area, we have again these 14,000 to 12,000 years old occupations, and then it goes to Neolithic, so something around 6,000, and then Bronze Age. We have all that. But I'm just going to talk about the Neanderthal area. One of the things we do both in Pizarro and here is we 3D plot every artifact that we find. So then we can reconstruct kind of the geometry of the units. And that's why we talk about all these archaeological units, because we have, I don't know if you can see it very well in that image, probably this one on the bottom. So this is the area we have excavated in red, and then these are 2 cuts, one that is north to south, and another one that is east to west. So east to west on the bottom, and you might be able to see, for example, between 7D and S1B, there is that gap in there. There is nothing in between. Same with C and D. So that's what we call the sterile layers. So we are able to individualize these occupations. This has been going on, this excavation, for a really long time, so we excavate very, very slowly every year. The dates are a bit of a mess at the moment, because we did what we probably shouldn't have done, or going, oh, let's get more dates, and then everything gets a mess. But that's a good thing, and we are getting more dates. For now, what we think, or what we propose, is the Middle Paleolithic seems to finish, or the Neanderthal occupation seems to finish around 43,000, and the Upper Paleolithic start at 40,000. That kind of match what happens in the rest of the Iberian Peninsula, but we still are waiting for some new and more precise dates that we need. In terms of the bones, there is a lot of bone, but they are very broken. So the number of the NRT refers to the total number of remains, so every bone that was found. So in total there is 55,000, and you need D and C are the ones with over 15,000, over 20,000, a lot of bone. But when you look at the bones that I'm able to identify to either a species or to the size of the animal, that reduces a lot because of the fragmentation and the bad preservation of the assemblage in Covagran. And when I look at the NISP, so the bones that I can identify to a species, that is even lower. And that's, again, very, very common in this type of site. So you can see that up here, the taxonomic identification rate is quite low, except for S1B1, because there are less bones too. Composition, taxonomic composition, similar to what we see in Pizarro. Maybe the only thing that is a bit different in Covagran is there is a bit more big bovids, especially in this S1B1 unit that we call. In this one, I remember excavating this big radius of urox or something. We don't have that in Pizarro. So that's the only kind of difference, but in the rest, it's pretty similar. We have some rhinoceros, a lot of rabbit again, and very, very few remains of carnivores again. When we look at the size categories, so a lot of the bones can only be classified by small, medium, large size. So it's in Spanish, but talla means size. 1 is small, 4 is very large. So that's the range. We are looking at the same. So medium to large size. That is what you would expect from horse, Iduntinus, that is the wild European donkey, and red deer or some kind of cervix. What it was interesting from Covagran is the number of individuals we have is really low. So if you look here, we can see horse, for example, that is the greater numbers. Still, we are looking in the levels where we have the more, probably 2 horses and 2 of the Iduntinus. That's really low for the amount of bones we have. The big red one is rabbits, again. So, because of the high fragmentation and how few preys we have, and also other factors from the stone tools that I don't have time to talk about, what we are proposing is Covagran, being located in that very enclosed valley, could have been like a stop on the way. Waypoint, they were going through the valleys, they were doing their things, collecting the rocks, they will stop there, half a meal and go. Or something like that. Because we don't have these big hearts, we don't have a lot of animals, we don't have what we find in other sites where it seems like people were there for a longer time. Neanderthals were there for a longer time. But of course, we need to test more and do a few more studies on that. We do have a few seasonality indicators, but not many. So I'm looking with some colleagues that they are going to look at the isotopes to see if we get better results. But there seems like it was occupied throughout the year in different seasons related to the hunt of different animals. That makes sense. But again, we need more information to talk about that. In terms of skeletal representation, very similar to what we have in Pizarro. So the limbs, long bones, all these high utility elements. Not many axial elements, or not many ribs or vertebra, but it is really difficult to identify ribs to a species when they are broken. So most of them will be on the size categories, really. When we look at, so what we are seeing here is a correlation between the minimal animal units, so the minimum number of bones of a specific skeletal element I have, it's complex. On the bottom we have the utility indexes, so how much meat do I get, how much offals do I get from that element. And what we could see is a more or less positive correlation, not very significant, but positive correlation in red deer, negative correlation in horse. But when we look at different preservation or differential preservation, so comparing again the minimal animal units with bone density, so bones that we preserve because they are just dense, there is a positive correlation in both. So we have to be very careful with the interpretations we make because of it's a nutritional pattern. It's what you will get if bones just preserved by nature, right? There are a lot of butcher activities, so a lot of cut marks, not many carnivores or raptor marks, only on the rabbits, burning, so all this kind. There is this interesting pattern in some of the bones. So this is a phalanx from a horse, if I'm not wrong, and that's a deer phalanx, and they are chopped, they are like cut in half. And I still cannot understand how they do that, how it can break like that. But anyway, oh my gosh, to let you go, some take-home messages. I like to say that Neanderthals were ready, willing, and able. So they were really good, as we all know. I want to keep saying, especially for you students, there are many new questions to be asked in all materials. So it's not all about, and I just had a discussion with someone a few days ago about it. It's not all about let's excavate and let's get more material. We still have material that needs to be analyzed properly. And we have new questions to ask to this material. So it's really important to look after legacy collections and all this kind of material that was excavated some years ago. I always, every time I talk about Neanderthals, I always think like, were they that different? So probably what you said, like us, probably they were not that different. So we have to keep forgetting about this idea of we are better and very different to our cousins. The idea of trying to provide some regional approaches to global questions, so that's what I'm trying to do with my thesis, and how those global hypotheses, so for example, when I was talking about the different interglacial and glacial cycles, they need to be addressed with local answers. So we are not going to be able to have, general information about what was the climate 45,000 years ago for Neanderthals. Well, in each area it's going to be different, so we need to be aware of that. And that leads me to the idea of the extinction. I always get asked, well, what caused the extinction of Neanderthals? We don't know. We are probably never going to know. And there were many reasons or many causes for it. It's not a single thing. So we need to analyze the context of what are we studying and where are we studying these things. And just to finish, I just want to say that I think the southeastern Pyrenees is a great enclave, a privileged enclave to study Neanderthals' lifestyle because we have this long chronological framework, but also a quite specific geographical framework. And with that, sorry for being so long, I will finish. Thank you very much.